You're lucky we haven't dumped you in a care home yet." That sentence didn't just land like a slap. It detonated like a bomb. Melinda, my own daughter, said it with a smirk, like she was making a clever joke. She didn't even look up from the tray of jewelry she was sorting through on my bedroom dresser. My jewelry. Family pieces that belonged to my mother, my wedding bangles, even the gold bracelet Charles gave me for our 30th anniversary. I stood frozen in the doorway, watching her fingers casually flick through memories, as if they were trinkets at a garage sale. From down the hallway, Brian, my son, shouted, "Hey, Mom, do you still need this checkbook, or can I just toss it and get you a card?" My voice lodged in my throat. In the corner, Josh, Melinda's husband, stood watching it all, silent, nodding occasionally as if to say, "Yep, this is normal. This is fine." That was the moment I realized they weren't helping me. They were erasing me. And I was letting them. I wasn't senile, I wasn't fragile, but grief had left me foggy and slow, and they took full advantage of that. It started, as most betrayals do, with concern wrapped in affection. After Charles passed, they began showing up more often. "Just checking on you, Mom. Want me to help with your mail? Don't worry about paying the electric bill. Brian took care of it." At first, I felt grateful. I believed it was family stepping up. But over time, the check-ins became routines, and the routines became restrictions. Brian changed all my bank passwords for my protection. Melinda insisted on keeping my jewelry safe from the maid. Josh began handling my bills. They told me I shouldn't worry about anything. That's what family was for. But I started noticing things. A missing brooch, my antique mirror replaced without asking, a bill for a plumber I never hired. They told me I must have forgotten agreeing to it. I began to second-guess myself. Maybe I had forgotten. Maybe I did agree. Maybe I was too old to remember all the little things. They made me question the one thing I had always been proud of, my clarity. And that was the cruelest part. When Melinda laughed at something I said and whispered to Josh, "She's slipping fast, poor thing," I smiled to their faces and cried in the dark. But I never forgot who I was. And more importantly, I never forgot what Charles told me before he died. He had been a man of quiet precision, an accountant by profession, but more like a human calculator with a heart. In the final weeks of his illness, he left me a brown envelope and said, "Open it if things ever get strange. You'll know when." I hadn't opened it. Not yet. I wasn't ready to face life without him. But after what Melinda said, after watching Brian toss my checkbook like it was a used napkin, I knew it was time. That night, after they left for dinner, I opened the envelope in the privacy of my room. My fingers shook as I pulled out the contents. A letter, a list of account numbers, the original deed to the house, still in my name, and the contact information for Henry Carmichael, Charles's longtime attorney. His letter was short, written in his careful, slanted handwriting. "If you're reading this, they've tried something. Call Henry. He'll know what to do. I left everything to you, not them. You earned it. Protect yourself." I read it twice, then 3 more times. Then I sat back in my chair, staring at the room around me, my room, my house, my life, and realized I had a choice. I could keep being their quiet victim, or I could take my life back. I chose the latter. The next morning, I called Henry. His voice was exactly as I remembered it. Calm, thoughtful, the kind of man who never rushed a sentence. When I explained what was happening, he let out a sigh and said, "Your husband saw this coming. He made sure you had options." He asked me to come to his office that afternoon. He didn't want to discuss details over the phone. When I got there, he had already pulled up the trust documents. He said, "You're the sole beneficiary. The house, the investments, the pensions, it's all yours. They have no legal access to any of it. But we'll need to move quickly. I'll get everything locked down and updated." I asked him if I could install security cameras. He said, "Absolutely. We'll do it discreetly. We'll make sure you're safe." I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Power. Quiet, pulsing power returning to my spine. They thought I was too weak to fight back. But they forgot that I spent 30 years raising them, supporting them, holding this family together through every storm. I hadn't lost myself. I had just been quiet long enough. For the next 3 weeks, I played my role well. I smiled when Melinda bragged about listing my house online. I nodded when Brian said he was cleaning up my finances. I even pretended to doze off when they talked about converting my home office into a nursery for Melinda's future baby. But behind the scenes, I was working with Henry. Every account was resecured. My credit was frozen. I filed a quiet police report for the stolen jewelry, not to press charges, but to document the crime. I upgraded my home's locks, installed covert cameras, and began packing things they hadn't yet noticed. My documents, my heirlooms, my peace. I kept one thing in the living room, a small framed picture of Charles. Every morning I'd look at him and whisper, "I'm almost there." Then, one evening, Melinda walked in with a real estate agent. She was wearing my mother's emerald earrings. Brian followed with an architect. They were laughing, planning, pointing at walls and windows like they owned the place. I stayed silent, hidden just around the corner, watching. I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. The night after the real estate agent walked through my living room like it was a showroom, I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't even speak. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat in the dark with only the hall light on, and stared at the glowing number on my security system. Armed, silent, watching. They thought I was powerless. They mistook my stillness for surrender. That was their first mistake. Their second mistake was underestimating how much I remembered, how much I recorded, and how much I prepared. The next morning, I called Henry. "It's time," I said. "I want them out." His response was simple. "I'll handle it. Everything is ready." Within 48 hours, I had court documents, letters of intent, notarized notices, and police-approved paperwork confirming I was the sole legal owner of the house and the trust Charles had created. All I had to do was serve them and reclaim what they tried to steal. But I didn't want to do it with cold paperwork. I wanted them to hear it from me. I waited until the weekend when they were all gathered in the living room, Brian on the couch, flipping through his phone, Melinda fussing over her new throw pillows, Josh quietly sipping coffee and pretending none of this had anything to do with him. I came down the stairs slowly, deliberately. I had worn the same dress I wore to Charles' funeral. Black, fitted, dignified. It wasn't for grief this time. It was for closure. "Can we talk?" I asked. Melinda didn't even look up. "Is it about your pills again? We already refilled them, Mom." Brian grunted. Josh glanced at me, then away. I took a deep breath and held out the manila envelope. "This is your notice. You have 72 hours to vacate my home." Brian laughed. "What are you talking about?" Melinda rolled her eyes. "Mom, please don't start acting crazy again." I didn't blink. "This house belongs to me. Always has. It's in a living trust. Your father made sure of that. You've been living here illegally. The bank accounts you accessed have been restored. The passwords are changed. The stolen jewelry has been reported. And every conversation you've had under this roof is recorded." Silence. Pure, perfect silence. Brian stood up slowly. "You recorded us?" I nodded. "Legally. With surveillance installed for my protection, just like the court advised." Melinda's face turned red. "You can't just kick us out. We're your children." "You stopped acting like my children the moment you started treating me like a burden," I said, my voice steady. I begged for family, and you gave me paperwork. I needed support, and you gave me silence. You tried to erase me, and now you're shocked that I refuse to disappear? Brian stepped forward. We were helping you. I stepped back. No. You were helping yourselves to everything you thought I wouldn't notice. You underestimated me. Josh finally spoke, his voice low. Maybe we made mistakes, but you can't just toss your own family out. Watch me, I said. They stormed out that evening. Brian cursing under his breath, Melinda slamming every door she passed, Josh trailing behind them like a guilty shadow. I didn't follow. I didn't even flinch. I stood at the window and watched them drive away, the taillights fading like the final flicker of a lie. And when the house fell silent again, I didn't feel empty. I felt clean. Over the next 3 days, they tried everything. Guilt, pleading, threats. Melinda sent text after text. You'll die alone in that house. You are unwell. We were only trying to protect you. Brian sent one message. We're still entitled to our share. I replied with 2 words. You're not. Josh never wrote, but a small box arrived on the 3rd day. Inside was my pearl necklace, the one that had vanished from my vanity 6 weeks ago. No note, just the pearls. As if silence could undo what they had done. It couldn't, but it did say something. I changed the locks again. Installed a new fence. I repainted the kitchen walls myself, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to reclaim the space. Every drawer I opened, every cabinet I reorganized, every shelf I wiped down, I was scrubbing away what they had tried to make of me. They called me fragile. They called me forgetful. They called me finished. But I wasn't any of those things. I was just quiet. And quiet is not the same as weak. They had taken my money. They had taken my jewelry. They had taken my dignity. Or so they thought. The truth was, I let them think I was helpless. I let them believe they had control. Because that's how you observe predators. You don't fight them when they're circling. You wait until they strike, and then you take back everything. I started donating the things they left behind. Clothes, electronics, even the dining set Melinda had imported and insisted was too classy for me to use. I sold it and gave the money to the women's shelter downtown. I cleaned the house from top to bottom and replaced every frame on the walls. Not one photo of them remained. Only Charles and I. Our wedding photo. A picture of him holding my hand during chemo. Our anniversary dinner in Venice. Me, in his old flannel shirt, painting the garden shed. That was the real story. That was the legacy I wanted to remember. A month later, I booked a weekend trip to the coast. I stayed in a quiet inn with ocean views and fresh scones every morning. I read 2 novels. I walked on the sand. And for the first time in a long time, I breathed without waiting for the floor to collapse beneath me. On the last night of my trip, I wrote a letter. Not to them, but to myself. I wrote, "You survived the theft of love, trust, and blood, and still you are here. Still standing, still sacred." I folded it, put it in my suitcase, and smiled. I had pulled the ultimate trick. Not revenge, not rage, but resurrection. The weeks that followed were quiet. And not the heavy, suffocating kind of quiet I had grown used to while they lived under my roof, but the peaceful kind. The type of silence that lets you hear your own heartbeat and the rustle of trees outside your window. I spent mornings in my garden, pruning roses that had been neglected, and evenings sitting in Charles's old recliner, sipping tea and watching the sun melt over the horizon. But peace, even when chosen, can feel unfamiliar. Sometimes I caught myself expecting footsteps in the hallway, someone shouting about misplacing the remote, or Melinda asking where I had left the receipts for groceries. I had lived under a sort of invisible occupation, surrounded by family who treated me like a relic to be managed rather than a woman to be honored. And though I'd taken back my house, my finances, and my space, the ache of betrayal pulsed quietly beneath the surface like an old bruise that hadn't faded. One morning, while organizing Charles's study, I found an old photo album hidden behind tax folders. I flipped through it slowly. Photos of birthday parties, camping trips, a messy kitchen full of flour when Melinda was 7 and insisted on baking me a birthday cake. Brian in his graduation gown standing next to me with pride and promise in his smile. How had we gotten from there to here? What had changed them? Or was the change always in them and I just refused to see it? That night, I sat on the back porch and let the question sit with me. And then the next morning, I started writing. At first, it was just for me, a journal entry, a page here and there. But the words came faster than I expected. I wasn't just writing my story, I was reclaiming it. Every detail they tried to erase, every insult they thought I wouldn't remember, every item they stole, I wrote it down, not as a victim, but as a witness. A week later, I attended a women's group at the local library. I had seen the flyer for Voices After 60 taped to the window and decided to go, not sure what to expect. What I found was a room full of women who carried stories like mine. Daughters who manipulated, sons who vanished, families who smiled in public and tore them down in private. I read a portion of my writing aloud. The room fell silent. Then someone whispered, "That happened to me too." And suddenly, the weight I had been carrying didn't feel so heavy. We cried together. We laughed at things we probably shouldn't have. We swapped stories and addresses and agreed to meet again next week. It was the first time in years I felt surrounded by people who didn't want anything from me but the truth. Meanwhile, the messages from Melinda slowed down, but never truly stopped. First, it was guilt. "You're not being fair." Then came pity. "You're clearly not well, Mom. We're worried." When that didn't work, she tried flattery. "The house feels so empty without your spirit in it." I never responded. Then one day she wrote, "Catherine needs her grandmother. Don't punish her for our mistakes." Catherine, my granddaughter, the only one who had ever visited me alone just to sit and talk or help me bake cookies. I stared at the message for a long time before closing the phone and returning to my journal. A few days later, a knock came at the door. I looked through the peephole. There she was. Not Melinda, not Brian, but Catherine, standing alone, clutching a tote bag and looking unsure. I opened the door slowly. She burst into tears before she even said hello. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Mom said you didn't want to see me, but I had to come. I had to know for myself." I let her in. She sat at the kitchen table, the same one I'd served her birthday pancakes for 10 years, and told me everything. That they had lied. That they'd told her I was sick. That I was giving everything away to strangers. That I didn't remember who she was anymore. But she knew better. And when she started digging, she found the truth. My journal, now printed and shared anonymously in a local support group newsletter, had made its way to her college inbox. She recognized the details, the dates, the voice. She said, "I don't know what they did to you, but I know what they tried to do to me, and I won't be part of it." I hugged her, tightly, not just because I missed her, but because she had broken the cycle. For the first time since Charles passed, I let myself believe that not all the love I'd poured into this family had been wasted. We talked for hours. She asked if she could visit again, and I said yes. That night, I slept with the window open, listening to the night air and feeling something stir inside me that had been dormant too long. Hope. It was small, but it was real. Catherine started coming every Sunday. Sometimes she brought flowers, sometimes pastries from the bakery near her campus, but always herself, fully present, fully aware, and filled with the kind of quiet remorse that didn't ask for forgiveness but earned it. We sat in the living room, my living room, and she asked questions that no one had asked me in years. What was Grandpa really like when no one was around? What were my dreams before I became a mother? What did I regret? What did I remember most from the days when the house was filled with laughter, not schemes? It was as if I had been cracked open, and everything inside that had been silenced, stifled, or swallowed came out like sunlight. I told her about the day I found out I was pregnant with her mother, how Charles danced in the kitchen with a loaf of bread in his hands. I told her about the first time I held Brian, how he grabbed my finger and didn't let go for hours. I told her about the quiet nights I stayed up late making costumes for school plays, the afternoons I clipped coupons just to afford their piano lessons. And then I told her how, somewhere along the line, my love was taken for granted, how they mistook sacrifice for servitude and devotion for disposability. Catherine listened. She cried. And then she did something no one else had done in a very long time. She thanked me. Genuinely. Wholeheartedly. "I don't think I ever realized what being a mother cost you," she said, "but I promise I won't forget it again." That was the moment I knew something had shifted. Not just in her, but in me, too. I was no longer carrying the grief alone. I wasn't alone at all. 2 weeks later, a letter came in the mail. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting immediately. Melinda's, tight and angular like a woman holding her breath. Inside was a single-page note and a folded piece of paper. The note read, "I know I've lost your trust. I probably don't deserve another chance, but this was always yours." I unfolded the paper. It was a receipt from a pawn shop. My wedding ring, the one she claimed had been misplaced months ago. The note didn't ask for a meeting. It didn't ask to talk. It simply ended with, "If you ever want to try again, I'll be here. If not, I understand." I didn't respond. Not yet. Some wounds close slowly, and some letters are meant to be read, not answered. I took the receipt and put it in my keepsake box, not because I planned to use it, but because it reminded me of something important. I had already won. Not in a gloating way, not in a petty way, but in the truest way, by surviving, by reclaiming, by refusing to let what they took define what I still had. A few days later, I hosted a small gathering in my garden, just a few women from the library group, a neighbor or two, and Catherine, who helped string lights through the lemon tree branches and picked flowers for the table. We drank lemonade and tea, ate too much cake, and told stories that made us laugh until our sides ached. And for the first time in years, I looked around and felt like I was home, not just in a house, but in a life that belonged to me again. Catherine hugged me before she left that night and said, "You're the strongest woman I know." I smiled and told her, "No, I'm just a woman who finally stopped apologizing for being strong." That night, I sat at my desk and wrote one final entry in my journal. They took everything they thought mattered: money, jewelry, pride, but they left behind the one thing they couldn't touch: my memory, my will, my love. And with that, I pulled the ultimate trick. I didn't disappear. I didn't explode. I simply endured until they exposed themselves. And then, with grace, I reminded them exactly who they were dealing with. I closed the book and set it on the shelf beside the photo of Charles. His smile looked different now. Proud. Peaceful. Like he knew all along I would find my way back. And I did. On my own terms, in my own voice, with my own strength. I tell the stories no one else dares to share. If you believe women over 60 deserve to be heard, Hit that subscribe button and share your voice in the comments.